This is Dustin Headley, and I work for the Institute for Digital Fabrication, and this tutorial covers exporting geometry from Rhinoceros to MasterCam 10. Okay, so first what we have to do is start to look at this as sort of a process. I've opened up a project that I'm working on in my own studio, and what this is basically just a bench. It's very simple. You can see how I kind of gone through the process and iterations of how this thing finally came about. And how this thing is going to look. Now what we're going to go over is this, actually the top surface of this is actually very textural, was my intent. And so I scripted using RhinoScript, a program that generates curves that are moving in 3 dimensions. That is X, Y, and Z. So each one of these curves is doing something fairly dynamic. And you can see that. So this is my intended surfacing for the bench itself. Alright, so now when we start to get these geometries ready for MasterCam, there's a couple of things you need to know about MasterCam. It takes IGES files, which I'll show you in a second what that means, and there's some export parameters associated with that, but probably, let's just start clearing this stuff out. It's a little housekeeping. Okay, MasterCam, when you export to MasterCam from Rhino, you need to make sure that your geometry is located in coordinate 1 of the Cartesian plane, and that's because MasterCam uses the origin point of the document in Rhino to locate the origin point of the geometry that it's going to be cutting on the mill, whether it be a thermoid, the shopbot, whatever CNC mill you're using. So, and secondly, when you orient it in quadrant 1, like this bounding box represents the size of the material that I'm going to be using, and I believe it's 48 by 10, 10.5. So I have, and this was done out of poplar, so I have this board that is 10.5 by 48 inches, and I'm going to be milling this pattern into it. Well, the top surface of that block, that stock, is going to need to be at the 0 coordinate. So you can see in section here where the geometry lands and how the geometry that I'm cutting lands below that. Now, my board was a 1.25 inch board, so you can see that I'm not going to cut all the way through with this geometry. In fact, the lowest that it goes is, I believe, right around there. And you can see that it's only going down a depth of 0.54 inches. So I'll be able to maintain this, this integrity of the board with that in mind. And that's something you should consider when you start to do this. If you want through cuts, you need to get a pair of calipers and a micrometer and measure the thickness of your material and set the depth of your cut to that depth. And actually, for the other parts of this, you can see I've done just that. If you measure from here to there, my stock was 0.88 inches, and so this will give me a through cut. And if I change layers, I'll show you what I'm talking about. This was another piece of geometry for the bottom portion of that bench. And here are the legs. So, just to give you an idea, and this is again all located within the size of my stock here that I'm using. Okay? So now what I'm basically going to do is once I have the geometry oriented properly, I'm now ready to export to MasterCam. And another tutorial will go through what you do in MasterCam to cover all this, but you are essentially ready to go from this point. So we're going to select the curves, and I like to select the bounding area as well, just so I have an idea, because you're going to use that information later on. Alright, so let's do an export command. Alright, and we'll just do this to the desktop, and we're going to call this bench surface. Alright, now in file types, we want to go down here, and the first file type underneath the Rhino files is the IGES file, and that's universally kind of industry standard file type that gets read by most programs. So we're going to go click Save. Now, this is typically what's going to pop up, and you're going to get all these export options, right? And there's all these options. We're talking about MasterCam 10, not just MasterCam. Come down in here, and then we want detailed controls, and the reason why I want detailed controls is I want to include Rhino notes in the IGES file and use the render color as the IGES identity color. That just will help you start to distinguish geometry. If there's any kind of confusion in here with your color scheme, that's going to be exacerbated by taking it into MasterCam without that consideration. So we're just going to click OK. And we're done. We've now generated geometry in an IGES file that can be read by MasterCam. Cheers.